Yeah.
General Motors claim within the last few weeks that they've secured enough for the next 5 years. They say. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's if they were to making those claims, I'm sure that the whoever that produced that much nickel would make that known, because that would be a very good news for whoever miner to. I headed up to the mine actually in Canada on Monday.
Oh, right. So what's happening at the mine? Where are you up to? What's your progress?
The project is we're the last final stretch. The project had over $55 million of investment. All the drilling that need to be done have been done, and these cost about $20 million. All the environmental permitting assessments and studies have been done, and those include the birds, the eagles, the bats, and the water monitoring, and which way the wind blows, whether there's been any archaeological sightings or any Aboriginal lived on the project before. So all that has been done. Where all the paperwork has been submitted. Hopefully, optimistically, we can get the green light and upgrade the project to be shovel ready by the end of the year. So once the project is permitted, then investors gonna look at the feasibility study and see the return on the project, and then looking into a sort of going on to this project financing phase. That could take anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending on the economics and the return of the project and the appetite of the investors. And from their point, then we're going to be start the shoveling of the project, the construction phase.
So just to give us, for people who are maybe haven't seen our other video, could you just tell people who you are and what you're doing now?
Right. Well, Sam, I have been in the nickel space for the last 10 years and have been in the mining industry for over 20 years. I started out as I started out my career in the dot-com industry and spent 5 years in the Silicon Valley in the late 90s. So I do have that perspective of sort of marrying the modern tech with the old, sort of traditional mining. And my first 10 years was as a mining investor and venture into running a mining company as a hobby, but that turned into a full-time position. And really that's my peak into nickel is that it's not as common as copper, and it has pockets of opportunities, and like gold and silver, that's mostly is being taken up by the major companies. And followed the nickel. I really started out as being too early in the nickel space in the 2010, and endured 10 years of pain and suffering with the invention of the laterite processing technology for nickel. So that is what they call the dirty nickel, or nickel pig iron, that the Chinese use to mine nickel out of the ground in Indonesia and in Philippines. So the laterite, so
they're doing it in a way doing it in a way that damages the environment.
Right. So nickel laterite production, the nickel from nickel laterite single-handedly accounted for all the nickel production increases in the last 10 years. And that is the reason nickel had been in the doldrum for the last 10 years. It's been oscillating at around $4 to $10 a pound nickel from 2010 to 2020. And then nickel has been given a sort of new lifeline with the advent of lithium batteries and with the new MMC 811 standards, and that's 80% nickel in the cathode and 10% cobalt and 10% manganese.
There's really kind of two different types of batteries in the industry. There's LFP and there's variations of NMC, like nickel, metal, cobalt. So then we call those a ternary battery, and LFP are lithium iron phosphate. And lithium iron phosphate batteries don't use nickel. LFP and ternary batteries pretty much always use nickel. Big increase in demand for nickel. This seems like at about a similar time the Tesla Model 3 came to market.
Well, it's interesting observation. A lot of times, Sam, that metals are a form of investment under the commodities realm. So typically you have stocks and bonds, and you have real estate and kind of everything else. So if you look at a percentage of investment in commodities as an overall investable assets, it's probably less than 10%, if not even less than 5%. So what really happened was that the nickel market is in a structural equilibrium before which means that the supply has been fairly steady and the demand and the usage of that is a mature market. had a steady growth rate in both the supply and demand. So it's a well-structured market. And what happened then is when you have something like an EV demand, that is price inelastic, right? Because you're looking at 100 pounds of nickel going into an MNC lithium battery for a Tesla Model 3. That's like $1,000.
How much is going into it?
About 100 pounds, depending on.
Oh, that's quite a lot. Yeah.
Right, but it's $1,000. So my point is, it's not as price sensitive for the battery procurement of nickel. They're not as price sensitive as say stainless steel or other alloys applications. So what I mean by that is all of a sudden you have new entrants into the industry. So that's kind of somehow put the market off tilt. But in addition to the actual physical demand into nickel, when Elon Musk 2.5 years ago talked to the, broadcasted that mine as much as nickel, we're gonna take all the contract that you all the nickel you can produce. I think that really attracted some speculators. So nobody really has a say as to, it's quite a bit opaque in the amount of nickel above inventory that's held by speculators and the new purchase of nickel by speculators hoarding the inventory versus nickel is actually going into industrial applications. So a lot of times you have the speculator that really play a major role in dictating the short-term commodity prices, as they did in oil. Oil went to negative actually, during COVID times, right? Because speculator bought too much oil and they have no storage to take that oil, so they had to sell. That put the oil into negative territory a year ago. I think very similar in that regard. I mean, obviously nickel doesn't have the problem of storage, but nonetheless, I think some of the volatilities in nickel, especially in March, when we witnessed the 5-fold increase in the nickel price from $10 a pound to $50 a pound, had also a lot to do with speculators. There are some that are long in the market and some of the short in the market.
So if the price goes from $10 a pound to $50 a pound, would that affect companies who are saying now, like I think Tesla probably has a lot of their nickel for the next few years already contracted, but would that affect companies, say General Motors, who are saying, "Oh, we need to sign new contracts for nickel"? Would then they be having to pay prices of $50 per pound, or could they negotiate lower than that?
Yeah, Sam. The answer is it all depends. You're dealing with a commodity and some very sophisticated buyer and a very sophisticated seller, because you look at the Glencores, there are the trading house involved. There are very knowledgeable people. So for the likes of Tesla or General Motors, they will usually go, it's about duration, quantity, and the price, right?
Yeah. So if you're buying more, you get it cheap.
It's possible, but I think more to the point is depending on the buyer, the preference of the buyer and the seller. The buyer can say, so if you look at quantity, so let's talk about duration. Tesla could say typically, almost like the contract Vale and also us in Indonesia, they could say, you know what, I want 10 years I want a 10-year contract, and I want no less than 100 million pounds of nickel per year. Okay, so that would be something that's quite reasonable and very likable to be the case, a duration and a quantity. The tricky part is on the price. The price could be, they could agree on benchmarking on the nickel price trading on the London Metals Exchange. So if that is a scenario, then that nickel.
That happens, does it? That happens. That happens, does it?
Oh, that's usually the case. I would say majority of the nickel contract is based on LME spot market. So if nickel were to be trading at $50 for, I think it was like for 2 days, then Tesla could potentially have paid $50 a pound for that few days. Okay. However, usually, again, depending on the commodity and the contracts in a given month or even in a given quarter, the price may be set on an average rated volume for the entire month or for entire quarter, but not on a daily basis. So again, those are the nuances that play into how much a buyer would be paying. However, I just want to say, however, there is a forward-looking price for nickel. So it's potentially also possible that Tesla could have locked in the price that it pays for its nickel purchase for the next 2 to 3 years. And the price that they pay for the nickel to be purchased in the future could be a formula based on the spot or based on the forward contract price, what they call the hedging. So that's, again, quite a bit of science. It will highly depending on the preference of the buyer and the seller.
How much is it going to cost to open your mine?
It'll be, the updated feasibility study will be out by the end of the year. You're looking at probably between $500 million to $1 billion. And the reason it's slightly less is because our mine is the nickel grades are double of what the other greenfield nickel projects are. So you don't need to mine as much to produce the same amount of nickel. Going back to your question specifically though, is what's likely the case is Tesla or say Glencore or whatever an off-taker of the metal, whether it be copper or nickel, it could be lithium, it could be whatever the metal, it could be gold, it could be silver. And if an off-taker really want the product, they could provide the capital upfront. So you can call that a project financing, or you can call it a prepaid offtake. So Sam, just imagine if you go to, it's no different when you go to a restaurant or you go to, you buy a gift card, right? And which you might get a discount for that gift card. You might buy $90, pay $90 for $100 worth of face value for that gift card or phone card. That's kind of like is very similar to what the off-taker is doing, because off-takers say, you know what, I'm taking on that risk of your construction issues, and in return, I want a discount on the product offtake. And the product could be discounted 10, even up to 20%, because that is the cost of capital. Again, I mean, so go to the nuances depending on the flexibility and the negotiated terms that typically an off-taker like Tesla or Glencore or Trafigura could be asking for collateral. And so there are some latitudes that the off-taker provides to the mining company. So, if you're a year late, you pay this much penalty. If you're 2 years late in delivering your product, you pay that much penalty. And if you're 3 years late, then I'm gonna call a force majeure, of which then I'm gonna take your asset as lien, and I'm gonna auction off so I can pay back my pay back on the loan. Again, it could be termed as a loan, meaning that it's a borrowing, or it could be termed as a prepaid product, which means that I'm paying you this much money and I want this much metals back. So that is something again, is highly customized and highly tailored. And the terms are really sort of how desperate is the mining company want to go to production, how many options they have, and versus how desperate the off-taker wants the product.
Right now, Tesla and BYD, they're on track to sell both well over 1 million EVs, the electric cars this year.
Yes.
So clearly, well, for example, in Tesla's case, they're using a lot of minerals. Would they have an advantage over their competition because right now they're producing more vehicles and they have contracts with current mining companies versus competition who are saying they'll be building more EVs, but right now are not? So say the competition are doing 1/10 of them. Does that give Tesla a buying advantage, a price advantage? So say General Motors, Ford, they're only building a very small number. That would mean Tesla clearly has to be buying a lot more of the metals that go into the batteries. Would that give them a buying advantage?
There's not really a volume discount per se, but what Tesla is doing is, and it's been unusual, and that's the example I give, maybe like Apple secure cobalt as its ingredient, because what Tesla is doing is, like I am contracting with LG or Panasonic for my batteries, and I pay this money, and you have to deliver this batteries to us, right? That's really sort of all that there is to it. But Tesla is doing one step beyond, almost doing a favor for the battery manufacturers. And I'm not sure if Tesla produces its own battery, but it's like, okay, well, if you force majeure on us, it's a big problem for me, right? It's monetary damage is inaccessible. So I'm doing a favor of helping you secure this critical ingredient for you to manufacture the batteries. But in the end, Tesla is just passing the cost of the nickel to the battery manufacturers, of which Tesla is paying them to make batteries for them. Now, how much nickel Tesla has secured is unknown. We don't know because that's not been disclosed. However, I mean, they're going very far out, I would say, to try to get the nickel that they need in the future. The issue now with General Motors is that I don't think, maybe they have secured, maybe they have not. They recently talked about with the LG. I think there is some alliance with LG in Korea.
General Motors claim within the last few weeks that they've secured enough for the next 5 years. They say. Yeah.
Well, it's if they were to making those claims, I'm sure that the whoever that produced that much nickel would make that known, because that would be a very good news for whoever miner to have that sort of offtake contract. Unfortunately, they don't want to advertise. The nickel mining companies are not likely to provide a discount for nickel to be sold. So either benchmarking against the spot price on the LME, or it could be a forward-looking price of which the LME publish, usually anywhere from 5 to 10% or 20% higher than the spot price 1 or 2 years or 3 years out. So Tesla may be paying a premium, because if they want a nickel to be from a certain jurisdiction, from a certain carbon emission, and they are willing to sign on a take or pay contract with Vale, Vale could be asking for a premium, depending how eager or how desperate Tesla is. The issue with GM, let me share with you the problem with GM, is if they were to sign a soft contract with, say, Trafigura or a trader who doesn't actually own the mine, or with sort of MOU where the mine would say, if I have uncommitted nickel, you're the right of first refusal, but the word commitment again goes into all over the place. So I'll tell you the problem that GM will have is that on the LME, which is the largest common metals exchange trading on the LME London Metals Exchange, which is owned by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, just very opaque. Only 20% of all the nickel change hands are through the LME, because LME standards are 99.8% nickel in nickel plates and nickel pellets. But there's a lot of nickel that are being trading, like nickel laterite, nickel pig iron, that doesn't have the same purity, or there's impurities or whatever it is, okay? Or for example, Sam, the deal between Vale and Tesla, that deal is gonna be off the books of LME. Like Vale is not delivering the nickel to LME, and then Tesla buying from the LME. So that they'll use the benchmark pricing on the LME as a benchmark pricing. But the metals are not actually changing hands through the LME. It's not like you're buying a Microsoft shares through your broker. But if GM were to have a contract with either a trader or a soft contract with the mining company that doesn't really have that exact allocation from the mine dedicated to supplying the contract to GM, the counterparty of GM might have to resort to the LME to buy that nickel if we couldn't find enough nickel from the London Metals Exchange. Then the problem really starts, because London Metals Exchange only account for 20% of all the nickel volume. You'll be bidding yourself, you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot, because once the inventory of metals in London Metals Exchange gets depleted, and the amount of that nickel is not even enough for a quarter or for 2 months of for Tesla's production, then you're going to see a replay of what happened in March, right? Where people start outbidding each other, because it's like, oh my God, we're in June, we don't have enough nickel for September, and you cannot shut down the supply chain. So I think you might have a situation where you had the Volkswagen, and that's why Volkswagen was one of the largest buyer position on the long side on the LME. Either they're maybe hedging for their nickel pricing, because like if they're benchmarking on the LME price for their nickel suppliers, then if nickel were to jump, they have to pay a lot more. So maybe they are just hedging their nickel position by buying contracts on the LME as a hedge, or they maybe really wanted to take that nickel out of the LME, which will be really of their last resort, because there's just not enough nickel on the LME to satisfy a single car manufacturer, not to mention multiple of them. I think most likely, if Elon's really gone Elon is really want to secure, he probably already hedged his nickel production. He already say, you know what, this year is 9, next year is 12, the year after is 13, right? Or maybe some formula between the current nickel price versus what they're trading on the LME. And the problem, the disadvantage of GM is maybe it's at the whim of what the nickel price is trading on the LME. So, I mean, LME could trade continue elevated level at $20, $30 per pound of nickel, and GM has no choice but to have to pay up because GM is unlikely to have to enter into the hedging contract with the nickel producers or nickel suppliers or nickel traders, Sam.
The other disadvantage of I see companies like GM have is that they don't plan on using any LFP. So they can't pivot from one to the other if there's not enough of one, if there's not enough phosphate or whatever. So by being stuck with one type of battery, it puts them in a position where they're completely reliant on that supply chain. And that's what I've been saying for a long time. I don't understand why they don't, like Tesla has 5 different battery suppliers. In fact, and they make their own batteries. So that's 6. Whereas GM has LG Chem. LG Energy, that's it. I just think that's insane, personally. I can't understand that.
Well, I mean, they've really caught up recently, right? Just in the last couple of 18 months. Remember their Volts had a lot of problems. Their Hummer is selling really, really well. And
the thing with that is that the main battery with all the problems across all the brands is the LG Chem, LG. Their market share has gone down massively in the last year as a result. You know, you hear all the recalls. It's the Bolt. It's vehicles with that battery chemistry. Not all of them, but 90%. Nickel production has decreased this year.
Right.
How come? Why is that?
Well, nickel has been. I mean, if you look at gold, right? Gold has gone from $300. I mean, gold is double price because the nickel price in the last 10 years has stayed steady between $5 and $10 a pound, whereas inflation compounded has almost doubled for price index. So there's just not enough of investment into nickel. Secondly, Sam, all the nickel production increases in the last 10 years is almost coming from nickel laterite. So that is a nickel. The better example, I would say, nickel sulphide is like the peanuts you have on your ice cream. It's easily separated from the metals. And that's why nickel sulphide is almost being exclusively used for nickel production up till 10 years ago. And nickel laterite is kind of like a Snickers bar, the peanuts in your Snickers bar. So it's very glued together with everything else. It's a lot difficult to extract. And what the Chinese did is literally chuck this Snickers bar out of a very low nickel content, and they would just put that into the furnace. And they would keep burning that nickel until it gets to around 7 or 8% nickel, which is the nickel grades used in stainless steel. And then, so they never try to get the peanuts out of 99% peanuts out of the Snickers bar, so long as you can get it to 10%. Then
so the nickel grade in the steel is lower, a lot lower than the nickel grade that you need in a battery cathode.
Right, but then they try to massage this technology, and so what they then use, Sam, is they will use pressure up to 50 bar, which is 50 times the immersive pressure, and they will cook it up to 300 degrees. Again, they were trying to just get the peanuts out of the Snickers bar by burning it by huge pressure, just all, everything by the book, the acid, by really use sulfuric acid of really very acidic, corrosive acid, try to dissolve everything else to leave the nickel in, to dissolve the nickel, and the tailings of which they dump into the ocean, with a lot of problems in Indonesia. So they still can manage to eventually get that nickel to a very, very high purity, but at a high cost, which kind of defeats the purpose. The whole reason you do this laterite is to get very, very sort of low-grade nickel, just to feeding into a subpar stainless steel, for the mass consumption. But then that's why, to get that laterite nickel to a very, very high purity class 1, that's costs a lot. It's not, it cannot be done. But it comes at a very high cost, and also on environmental cost. So I'm going back to the questions of why is there not even nickel is, because in the laterite, a lot of guys trying to get the very high grade nickel out of laterite, and it's been billions of dollars in Madagascar, in Goro, in Caledonia, and also in Philippines, and they're running a lot of problem in tailing spills and getting the purity they needed for the battery. And then what happened is Sam, you're seeing the departure of the Japanese away from these high-cost laterite experiments because they couldn't get the purity, and the carbon emission is 100 times, up to 100 times of that nickel sulfide. So I think conclusion is the nickel sulphide, there has been any mines being permitted over a few, probably 5 or 3. And nickel laterite, everybody's shying away from that because the carbon emission. So even if nickel price were to double, to get a nickel mine from, especially sulphide, from a greenfield to discovery to feasibility study to permitting, it's going to take you about 10 years. So you are now in your place, regardless of the nickel price as a stimulant. And maybe, you know, there are some sort of brownfield mines, they try to restart the operation, but these are very smaller underground mining projects in Western Australia. They're not going to move the needle. I don't think you're going to see any significant increase in nickel production, either from laterite or from nickel sulphide in the next 5 to 10 years. And I would say the next 5 to 10 years is exactly what this sweet spot for nickel is, because it's going to be at that much time before a new substitute for nickel to come in. So in a way, the LFP battery is actually welcoming into the whole nickel landscape, because if MNCA 11 is the only battery, the battery form, then there's just simply not enough nickel to go around, and you're going to see nickel sort of, you know, the trajectory of nickel is not going to be welcome for the battery providers. I mean, I think another good example I would use is platinum and palladium back in year 2000, when platinum prices were high, 5 times the price of palladium. Platinum was about $800 in 2000, and palladium was maybe like $50. So everybody chimed into palladium, and all of a sudden there's not palladium to go around, and palladium went from, I don't know what the bottom palladium is, palladium went from like to $800. And then everybody went back to platinum. Unfortunately, you don't have that easy substitute for nickel. So I think that nickel is in kind of you know, a good sweet spot there. And that's why my belief is that the March run-up that you saw, where nickel went from $10 to $50 a pound in March, is only a glimpse of maybe what's to come. I mean, there are some mitigation strategies, exactly like Elon had deployed, to go directly with the miners. So you're bypassing the LME to secure your supply. But unfortunately, you know, when push comes to shove, like the GMs or Volkswagen or Ford or 10 other auto manufacturers, when they're running out of nickel from their existing sources, they're gonna have, or the counterparty of which these car manufacturers procure the nickel, if they don't have enough coming from the mine, they're gonna have to go to LME, and there's not gonna be any relief, because it doesn't matter whether it's coming from LME or battery. I mean, you're all of it is going from the same mines. And I can count in 2 hands. All the mining companies are producing nickel, only 10 of them. And that's why, Sam, just one real quick point is, you're seeing a takeover of BHP offered to buy OZ Minerals in Australia for $25 billion. And BHP has a lot of insights on the nickel demand in the future, because they're besides Vale, Glencore, Trafigura, they're the largest nickel producer. And so I'm sure they're already taken a lot of calls from battery manufacturers and auto manufacturers, to the point where they actually fly up to Canada, which is, you know, 10,000 miles, and then embarking on nickel mine acquisitions of a project called Noran. Eventually it got outbidded by, guess what, another Australian company called Wailu. And then they outbidded, I mean, the price of Noran went from 50 cents to over $3. So you can see, I mean, there are not a lot of especially quality nickel sulphide project. All the sulphides are coming out of Russia, Australia, Canada, and you know, there's some in the United States, but the permitting is going to be take some time. There's some coming into China, so it's not like you can stumble in the middle of Africa and discover a nickel sulphide project. There's a lot of different dynamics going on, and it's very fascinating that a lot of the guys are looking forward, even though at today's low nickel price, historically speaking, to try to secure these nickel mines. Sam?
Question for you. Elon Musk apparently has been in Canada lobbying, lobbying the Canadian government, and apparently they're trying hard as well, to get him to build a gigafactory in Ontario, in Canada.
I heard that.
Would it make sense? They will be using 4680 battery cells at that gigafactory, assuming that goes ahead. Seems like there's a good chance it will. Would it make sense? Those 4680 battery cells do use nickel for them to get the nickel from your mine, your new mine, will that be near that gigafactory in Ontario and Canada?
Right. Well, Sam, a ton of nickel is $120,000. So I would say it's not really, I would say setting a gigafactory in Canada again, it's such a smart thing to do, Sam. I don't think it really makes a difference on where the gigafactory is, because
So it's not cheaper to get the minerals if it's closer to ship them.
Well, you're looking at $122,000 a ton. So you can ship
shipping
a ton.
cost is only a very small percentage.
I mean, you can ship a ton of nickel from say from a smelter in Europe to China for $60 a ton. So it's not really. I mean, it's a decimal.
Is that all it is? $60 a ton.
Yeah, it's decimal.
Wow.
It's a decimal. It's a decimal. It's not really
nothing.
It's not going to move the needle. However, I will tell you this: given our mines in Manitoba, if a giga, and we have been given a lot of we have given a lot of attention on this project on the sort of on trying to get our project permitted on an expedited basis. So I mean, clearly, if Elon were to invest in Ontario and getting a lot of political embrace and a lot of political goodwill from the Ontario government, and that could be, and again, Ontario has some nickel project, or Manitoba, which is adjacent to Ontario, then I think working in totality, the Ministry of Mines is going to be given sort of a directive to try to permit as many mining projects as possible in Canada, because you're creating jobs, right? I think that is what Elon is trying to do to try to move these supply chain along. That is really I see. The
mine looks pretty close to Ontario.
Or also keep in mind that Vale, all the mines Vale owned in Canada used to come from Inco. And they spent several $1 billion. I can't remember what the price tag is, around 10 years ago. So they bought all the mines in Inco. The three major mining camps that Vale bought from Inco, or Inco had present, were Voisey's Bay. So that is that's in Newfoundland. That's a very big, that's probably the largest nickel sulphide mine that's been commissioned in the last 20 years. In the size of similar to Norilsk, which is 8% of the Russia, they're 8% of the nickel production, or around 20% of the nickel sulphide production today. And the second one is Sudbury, that's in Ontario. And then third is in Thompson, that's where our mining project is. So I think that there's a lot, I mean, no doubt there's a lot, they're well endowed in a lot, there's a lot of nickel. The bottleneck, however, is going to be, it's just going to be how fast you can mine. And also keep that in mind that the product coming from the mine is what they call the concentrate. It's a 20% concentrate through conventional flotation gravity process, of which it doesn't burn anything. So you're just, you're using flotation to get that 20% concentrate, and then the concentrate will have to then be fed into a smelter. And majority of the smelters are in Ontario, and there are also have some hydromet smelters in Saskatchewan and also in Newfoundland. And then, so if Elon were to have a gigafactory in Ontario, then that we're going to take a full advantage use of the smelting capacity. There are some owned by Vale, and there are some owned by Glencore, and then that would be refinery smelting right out in Canada, in Ontario, that can go right into that gigafactory.
If Tesla's been talking about getting into mining themselves, they've said this on a few occasions, is it possible they could buy your mine out? Would you consider that? If that was on the table? Well,
I would believe I think Tesla is doing, first of all, is going to guys that know how to mine, right? So they're very smart. They didn't go to Trafigura, or they didn't go to Glencore, because these are more like a trading house. So so Elon knows that when push comes to the shove, you can sign whatever contract that you want. It's no different from signing a contract from a battery provider. It's a paper contract. He wants the physical goods. So he's very smart in going directly to the miners to sign contract. So he's been doing that. And if it's not being enough, he also go to in Indonesia, going directly with the government, because again, he knows that, eventually you got to talk to the guy actually can come up with the nickel. And as far as buying a mining company, I would say that's probably the last resort. He could certainly do that. But I think first of all, if he were to buy a mining company, he would likely to buy somebody who's already producing, because then he doesn't need to, because a lot of the mines is a combination of the technical risk, the permitting risk, and the financing risk, right? So you have the technical risk, that's got a lot to do with like metallurgy and mining and all that's quite difficult in itself already. And there's the permitting risk, like the First Nations and the issues with local community. And then there's also the financing risk, meaning that hedging, like we talked about, optimizing the mine. These are highly complex, sophisticated operations. So, Elon will have to recruit a brand new team to manage that. So I would think the first choice was to buy mines directly from the mining companies. And if mining companies would not want to commit to giving Elon a hard quota of supply, then maybe that Elon will buy a stake like he did with Twitter to try to influence, to get that quota, right? At least acceptable terms and not losing an arm and a leg. And then I think then all else fails, then he will then branching into emerging producers or greenfield companies that are yet to go to production, or maybe sort of in the construction phase, but not yet, in the stage ready to be producing nickel. Because remember, as I mentioned, nickel is not coming out of the ground into becoming nickel metal from a miner like us. So you have to go through a lot of their logistics and refinery, smelting, refining, and of that, there's all different gatekeepers on that regard as well. So it's a very convoluted process. I mean, I'm not sure. I think Elon will only go into that as the last resort.
One more. If in 2030, 25 million cars are produced with ternary batteries, so with nickel batteries using nickel, would there be enough nickel to produce 25 million EVs in 2030? So 8 years
25 million EV with LFP, or are you talking about MNC or
no, NMC? 25 million. I think that it'll be about 50 million EVs, half and half. So 25 million with NMC. Would there be enough nickel for that?
So you got 25 million with MNC at 100 pounds. You're looking at 2.5 billion pounds of nickel. So the mining industry need to churn up 50% more nickel than we have today. And you're looking at a mining industry that is in a deficit already today. So it's a mathematical impossibility, Sam.
Okay. Very definitive answer. I like it.
I mean, today's nickel production is 5 billion pounds. So at 25 million vehicles at 100 pounds per vehicle is 2.5 billion pounds. So that's half of what the nickel production today. And also keep in mind, Sam, I don't believe that the EVs are going to be able to. I would venture to say probably a third of the 25 million are able to buy. Sorry, not just say half. Okay, for the sake of simplicity, I would say only half the EVs are able to buy nickel laterite. So because laterite carbon emission is up to 100 times more than nickel sulphide. Maybe the Chinese and the Indians and they were able to take that laterite production, but I would say Europe and Canada and they're not going to buy nickel from laterite. So that would add additional layer of complexity into the equation. You know what though, Sam, I would say that if there's a problem, you're not going to have to wait till 2030. I think you're going to see that probably 2025. That problem is going to bubble to surface because as we have engaged in a number of discussion with battery manufacturers and auto manufacturers that are some of the top 5 in the world in batteries and in auto.
So you've been talking to battery manufacturers?
They are coming to us today, unsolicited. And they are, and the conversation goes like this. I said, well, thank you for getting to us. I don't know how much homework we've done, but I just want to be upfront that the earliest I can give you nickel is 2026. And they were relieved to hear that. They said that everybody else we talked to outside of the Vales of the world and the BHP of the world is 2029, 2032. So that tells me that the discussion between, say, the GMs and the Volkswagens and the Fords, they're not going very well with BHP. If they were, they would not be going into high risk, 5-year outdated nickel produce. Like they wouldn't even bother, right, the time of the day, because for a mine such as ours, we will be doing 20 million pounds a year, which is 200,000 vehicles a year. That's all.
Yeah.
And that would not be even meeting the quota, like 20% of the quota in a quarter for Tesla or the future. So for these guys to be going downstream, for somebody who is 5 to 10 years out production, and for an amount that would not satisfy a quarter of their for the required input for nickel, tells me that the discussion was really at a standstill point with all the existing nickel producers already. I'm almost certain that Tesla, Elon is paying a premium for their nickel production out for that role, for that fixed, for that. And then I would think the price is only going to go up.
So there's only one possibility for the electric vehicle market, which is to pivot. They have no choice. They have to pivot to using manganese in the cathode. There's or LFP as it is just, if there's not enough nickel, there's not enough nickel. Just I don't see any other solution.
Well, there is a classic supply and demand, so they could displace. They could like, suppose, hypothetically speaking, it's not even hypothetical, but it's already happened one time in March, 5 months ago. Let's just suppose right now nickel is at $10 a pound. Let's just say nickel stabilizes. I will see it probably going locking step like a ladder. And I would just say maybe there's some nickel being hoarded, and then maybe they'll come on the market. Who knows above stockpile inventory of nickel is right now. I don't think it's a whole lot, maybe for a quarter or for 6 months of nickel production. But let's just say if nickel went from $10 to $20 a pound or $30 a pound. You know what? You're looking at 100 pounds MSCA 11 going into Tesla Model 3, and maybe 200 to a Y, depending on the kilowatt hour. We're looking at 80 or 1,000 kilowatt hour storage capacity. But 100 pounds of $10 to $20 nickel is a difference of $1,000. So that's an example, Sam. That's like a carbon fiber door trim of a Porsche, right? So I don't think that's gonna make or break a nickel substitute technology.
No, maybe not, but it's a big difference, because we're talking like the average person isn't paying for a Porsche. The average person is paying, $40,000 for a car. That's a big difference just for one very small part of that car.
And that's why I believe that MSCA 11 is going to use in Lamborghinis in the high performance, in the S model, but not in the DX, right? In the EX model, not in the DX. But then if you look at the price differential of, say, the base Corvette versus the L7 Corvette, I mean, looking at almost doubling in price. So I still see a MSCA 11 and a $30 nickel. Maybe the portion of that would be 30% or 20% of all the EV batteries. And I would say that at $20 or $30 nickel, then the EVs are gonna eat into the market share of the traditional alloy space, where they could be looking at other substitutes like chrome and aluminum, whatever other substitutes that have for nickel. And I think there's easier substitutes found at a lower price versus kind of like yes or no, right, with nickel in MSCA 11. So
is there a lot of manganese? Do you know? Is there enough manganese?
It's definitely a lot more common in manganese than nickel. Manganese, I don't know manganese price. I have to do on top of my head, but these prices are also quite volatile. But right now, I think nickel is, after gold and silver, in more a common known metals, one of the more expensive and rare metals to be found. Nickel production is around 7 times more than copper. So and then but by and large, it's I mean, copper is 7 times more than nickel, but nickel is, say, compared to say moly or some other minor metals, is still quite common occurrence, metals of common occurrence. Manganese, I need to come back to you on that. I think manganese is a lot more common. It's easier to extract and the grades of manganese are a lot higher than nickel. Like typically you're mining open pit nickel at around 0.7% nickel and 1.5% underground, whereas manganese are magnitude higher in several percentages. So just so you're aware, you know, when you say 1% nickel just per ton for the sake of simplicity, you're looking at 20 pounds of nickel in a ton, or 10 kilo nickel in a ton of ore. So imagine you having a ton, or if a Tesla, you're looking at 3-ton vehicle, right? So you're looking at extracting like something like the size of a basketball out of a Tesla volume car, which is similar density than the ore, than the rock it looks. So I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, and you have to mine it, refine it to 99% purity. I think all in all, even at $10 a pound nickel, you're looking at really quite a bit of bargain, because all these smelting and refining capacities, they're all being built 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago. Like all the Ontario smelting and refining capacity all built 20 to 50 years ago. To replicate that will cost you billions of dollars, especially you have to retrofit that with the highest emission compliance technology. So I think we should be quite blessed to see nickel. We're buying a pound of nickel coming from just 20 kilos out of a ton and having to go through that process for only $10 a pound. And for that reason, as I mentioned to you before, the downside for nickel, I think the upside of nickel definitely is a lot higher than the downside, given that it's broken out of that 20-year technical trading band, and with the new with established use for nickel from the past added to the new age renaissance of battery thrown into the mix. Really see that as a good sort of investment option. But as far as how high nickel goes, I don't think that you're going to get 100 million cars by 2030, but I do think that probably you can get a 50% penetration. News just also Australia yesterday that the Bank of Australia is going to stop financing new ICE vehicles. And there are so many things you can do to discourage, right? You can put the carrot and the stick, carrot on the subsidies on the buy, and then stick on the ICEs. And if they want to stop, if they really want to put a lid on ICE, then they can easily do that. But however, I think we talked about it, so once you have autopilot, why would anybody want to own a car, right? I mean, you have a taxi, half the cost is in labor, that's gone, and a case can really be made to own an EV, especially given that you're not getting that VA sound. And I think auto enthusiasts wouldn't be buying 6 Teslas, putting in the garage like they do with their Porsches and with their Ferraris. So I just don't see that much demand coming on. I think we're probably in the peak of the auto production. And then also there's talk about where you want to go in terms of war population. That's another whole subject matter.
Can you say which battery companies have approached you? You're allowed to say that?
We cannot say that, but I could tell you the top 5 auto manufacturers in the world, and also the top 5 battery manufacturers in the world we're engaging in very active discussion. I think, Sam, we also maybe briefly touched maybe with you or some other channels that we view the Japanese as being late to the game in securing their EVs in their nickel sulphide and in their nickel battery. They're playing catch up. And just recently, Mitsubishi signed a joint venture with one of the nickel junior greenfield mining companies in British Columbia that requires something about $3 billion capital expenditure to put the mine together. And the project is at a much earlier stage than our project. So, and then you're looking at also news from Sumitomo staying away from that ladder, right?
Mitsubishi not going to get any nickel from that for at least 10 years, right?
Yes.
The thing is,
so you can
how can Mitsubishi sign these kinds of contracts? They only sell, they sell less than 1 million cars a year. Like it's like 800,000.
I don't know, but that's not just first. And Mitsui, which is one of the largest steel producers in Japan, they obviously know the nickel very well. Just 3 months ago, they also invested in a very greenfield, very small nickel mining exploration company, very, very small. So we're also quite dumbfounded by that. So I think that the Japanese are playing catch up. That's, so maybe that's a sign, right? There are just not that many nickel sulphide projects that are not controlled by a junior. And certainly I think Vale and the BHPs and BHP going into OZ Minerals, try to secure their nickel resources. I'm sure all these companies are hugging their nickel resources, not going to let go. So, and the chance of making nickel sulphide discovery is very slim, and all the major prospective land packages are held by the Glencores and Vales. So very, very slim picking, Sam. And if you look at all the nickel sulphide mining companies, exploration company listed on the ASX and the TSX, you're probably looking at less than 30. There's very, very slim picking. So I really don't know how it's going to play out, but certainly these major conglomerate in stainless steel producers and in battery manufacturers are moving down the chain, very down deep. That speaks to the current conversation. You know, I think they're at the standstill. And the secondly is they're really needing nickel, looking at least 5 to 10 years out.
If car manufacturers are going to be buying more nickel, could that mean that steel manufacturers could have problems with not getting enough nickel?
Right. Well, first of all, auto manufacturers that buy nickel just means that they don't trust. They have an trust issue with their current traders or from the battery manufacturers, right? They're just not, they don't believe, right? They just want to make sure they can secure that. I think these battery guys is going to take the market of the nickel market by storm. And what I mean by that is currently the stainless steel manufacturers, you know, the spoon guys and the piping guys, maybe like right now, if they need nickel, they just call Trafigura, they will call Glencore. They don't really have a fixed contract. It's just at the market contract, right? Typically, Sam, they just say, you know, I want 10,000 tons of nickel. I want to deliver to my port in Australia or my facilities in Detroit, whatever it is. But however, so under these kind of contracts, Sam, the traders don't have an obligation to deliver because it's on the spot basis. That's typically how the metals go, Sam. That with the copper and with nickel, with the well-balanced market. So if you have this EV disruptor that come onto the scene, maybe these guys will call Glencore one day and Glencore say, I'm sorry, I don't have nickel for you. And then they call Trafigura. Trafigura said they don't have. And then these spoon guys, right, this piping guys, they also sometimes have this mission critical. They have a building they need to put together by, you know, Trump Tower, for example, or in Abu Dhabi. They're gonna run into the problem. And I don't know, Sam, that obviously they don't have this foresight as Elon Musk or you and I. And maybe one day, I don't know, because I don't see a piping company calling me asking for nickel. So maybe one day, like all of a sudden nickel, and you know what, they're not going to discover and find out only when nickel went to $30 and when people have a stranglehold on the LME inventory. And then all of a sudden when they say, holy shit, like, I need nickel, they call the traders, their traditional sources, they could not find any. And then we'll go to LME. Well, when they do on LME, the problem, Sam, as I told you, first is there's not enough nickel on LME. And secondly, you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot because every pound of nickel you buy, the price is going to go up more and more and more. So you're shooting yourself in the foot. And I will tell you this, Sam, I know this very well because we have another sister company that mine vanadium, or that are permitting a vanadium mine in the United States. Vanadium went from $4 to $33, just like nickel did in a span. Well, it's not as sort of crazy action like nickel, like went from 10 to 50 in 3 days, and the nickel market's halted for 2 weeks, and then you know there's a bit of shenanigan going on. And what happened? We can talk about it some other day. But for vanadium, went from 4 to 33 in 2 months. So all of a sudden, when guys from Dubai, even from Russia, which is the third largest vanadium producer, they came to us. I believe that, you know, both the vanadium traders and consumers, they were calling us because I think they're traditional sources that Glencore, because Glencore has controlled about 60% of the vanadium, maybe even more. Chinese control about 30%, and Russia control about 10 or 20%. I think they were calling their traditional sources, and the traditional sources said, I'm sorry, you're not my VIP. I don't have vanadium for you. Not at any price. There's nothing. There's nothing. And I think there could be soon a day of reckoning for a lot of the not the word recreational, but these guys are going to see a day of reckoning if all of a sudden nickel went 10, 20, $30 and they were calling the Glencores and Trapegoras, the traders. The traders like, I'm sorry, I don't have for you. Forget about Vale and BHP. Why would BHP buy mines north of Canada, in Canada? And then I think then they're going to go to the LME and they're going to start calling people and they're not going to find any.
So the same thing
Sam.
would happen to car manufacturers who are not getting ready for this.
Well, the smaller car manufacturers going to Foxconn and go to LG, right? So then the LG, or like typically the LG might have some spare, and then the LG is going to tell them, like, I'm sorry, I'm done for the next 5 years. I can put you on the waiting list. Or if somebody got bumped out, like you try to buy a reservation seasonal ticket for your favorite basketball team, right? Like I'm out 3 years. You can put a reservation like on 2028 and I can put you on the waiting list, but there's nothing. They will call LG. Most likely they're going to call LG and Foxconn and Panasonic, and they're going to say, I got nothing for you. And then they're going to then call some Chinese manufacturers of which they don't know, the quality, say, hey, I need this battery. Can you make for me? And then these Chinese guys are going to, calling around and sourcing some scrap metals. And they're going to charge these car guys an arm and a leg. I think that's going to happen. And then these guys are not going to call us. Then the Chinese battery manufacturers going to start, Indian, the Chinese, right? They're going to start calling mines and say, hey, do you have nickel? And they're not going to call the mining companies. They're going to call the smelters and refineries, of which there are some in China. And then they're going to do digging on some laterite in Indonesia and the Philippines, of which Indonesia is talking about creating a nickel refinery, and they don't like this idea of just exporting their raw materials without being value added. There's not an easily fixed solution. The question here is where is that equilibrium? I do think that equilibrium price will be reached with a substitute nickel in some other industries, and high enough a nickel price to deter some of the car purchasers and et cetera. I don't know that equilibrium prices. My guess is it could be 20s and 30s, maybe 40s, which is 3 times from now. Still, under that circumstance, you're still going to find a market for MNC A11 because some of these cars are selling at $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. Like this Hummer, right? They're selling at $200,000 on eBay right now, even though the MSRP is at 100. So
crazy. Thanks for talking to me, mate.
Yeah, Sam. I think for your audience, we'd like to know a little more about nickel and just the metals market. Feel free to look me up. I'm very active on Twitter. You can just search John Lee Battery Metals. You'll find me there. I got about 2,000 followers. Or if you want to learn more about how a mine works and the economics of a mine, you can visit FLYNnickel.com, FLYNnickel.com. We have a 300-page feasibility study on our homepage and a technical study on our homepage of which you can read about it. We'll put a link in the description in the video. Yeah, thank you for your time, Sam.
See you next time.